Hello friends, I'm Aisling. You're very welcome here, and today, of course, I'm here to talk about books. So today I'm going to do my third quarterly book report. I will admit I completely forgot to do it for my second quarter, but never mind, we'll just move on. So between July, August and September, I read 37 books, some of them great, some of them not so great. I gave 1 5-star, I gave 16 4-stars, and then 21 are 3 stars or under. So not too bad. Again, I don't normally give out too many 5 stars, so I think even 1 is great because I might not give out a 5-star in a whole year. I know. So the longest book that I read was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara at 737 pages. Bit of a monster. And then the shortest book that I read was a Claire Keegan short story called So Late in the Day, and that was 47 pages. So today I'm going to just quickly run through kind of 6 of what I think are maybe the best books or the most interesting books that I read in this quarter. We have a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of contemporary, and some kind of fantasy romance as well. So without further ado, we'll get cracking. In no particular order as well, I might mention. So the first book I'm going to speak about was Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. I also read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which was also brilliant, but I think for me Sea of Tranquility probably pipped it to the post. So this is quite a short novel, but what it lacks in length, it really squeezes a lot in there, to be honest. We start out in, I think, Vancouver in something like 1912, but we also end up on the moon in 500 years time. So there is quite a bit of shifting timelines in this. As I said, I read Station 11 and you can tell that they were written by the same author. They kind of have a lot of similar themes, which I actually quite enjoyed. Sometimes when authors kind of reuse the same ideas, I feel like they're maybe a little bit overwrought, a little bit overdone, but I really enjoyed both of these books for what they were. I found it quite complex, but not to the point that it was really difficult to follow. Like, it is technically a sci-fi, but it's very literary. Sometimes with sci-fi I find a bit of that going on. I just don't know what's happening, but this is very readable. The characters are quite interesting, how their lives kind of interact and the different stories and the different timelines interact. I found really clever, really interesting. I didn't get confused, which is amazing. And it wraps up really nicely as well. So I would definitely recommend this book if you're looking for a little bit of a palate cleanser, because as I said, it's quite short and it's just really intriguing. If it sounds like it's up your street, do give it a go. So next up is a book that I spoke about at length in my September wrap up. It was the 1 5-star that I gave out this year, and of course that was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. This was the first book that I read in September and the best book that I read in September. On one hand, I loved that I read this book, but it is about a month and a half now since I finished this book, and I still find myself feeling a little bit like I'm in a reading slump. Nothing is really hitting the mark in the way that this book did. So we follow a group of 4 friends who meet in college. So we have Jude, Willem, JB and Malcolm. 4 quite different men, but they have a lovely friendship going on. We follow them from that age, so kind of early 20s-ish in college in New York, I think, and then the novel kind of spans the expanse of the rest of their lives and their relationship and the interplay between each other that they have as the years pass. This book, as you've heard, it's really traumatic. There is a lot going on in here that could be considered trigger warnings, so I wouldn't maybe just step into this book knowing nothing. It's an entirely character-driven novel, so in terms of plotting, there is a plot, but there's not much of a plot. We just follow their lives, we follow their different perspectives, and we do learn that this book is essentially about one of the 4 friends more so than the others, and we learn about his life, and as we go we learn about his childhood and his upbringing and the things that he endured and the things that happened to him, and it's horrendous, but it's beautifully written. It's so literary. It's such a I was enamored with this read. I really found it to be so immersive. I didn't want to put it down. Every night going to bed, I was going to bed really early, getting into bed to read it. I read it in the space of a week, and that week was just all I could think about was this book. It was all I wanted to talk about, and let me tell you, I love a sad book, but this was something else. I have never cried as much reading a book. It's very difficult to read. So I will say, you've heard it before, it's a tough read. It's been called trauma porn. Take from that what you will. I loved it personally. I would recommend it, but I would just say don't go into this book thinking it's going to be like a breezy read, because it's not. It's a very good read though, I will say, but I know that it's not for everybody. I hear the criticisms about this book and I respect them, and to some degree do agree with some of them, but still, I just think this is a literary masterpiece, and if it feels like something you might be up for reading, if you're in a good state of mind and feel strong enough to get through something quite difficult, absolutely read this book. Next up then, we have another sci-fi, another really short sci-fi. This book, so it was This Is How You Lose the Time War. I read this book in pretty much one sitting. It is quite short. It's a love story. It is an epic love story, and it spans time and space, essentially. I don't know how to put it other than that. So we witness a correspondence between two rival agents who are fighting in this war. We don't know really what this war is about. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know why they're fighting, but it doesn't matter. So I would say you have to read this book in the sense that you just know that you're not going to get the information that you want. You're not going to get the world building. You're not going to get all of that. You have to accept that, and then you have to just move on. Because I was about halfway through this book and I found myself wondering what's going on here. And I was getting in my own way in terms of reading this book. I really was. So I wanted to know more about the world. I wanted to know more about the war. I wanted to know more about the characters. I got halfway through and I kind of Googled, like, do we get that information? I learned, no, we don't. And then I could just throw myself into the book and not worry about all of these things that I had been worried about. So as I said, we witness a correspondence between these two rival agents, and they're obviously both hell-bent on securing the best kind of possible future for their warring factions. The discovery of this correspondence would mean certain death for them both, but they continue. So when you sit back and you just allow this book to take you where it goes, that's when it really sings. Don't expect loose ends to be tied up. Don't expect any ends to be tied up. It's a really original read. It's really just a beautiful read, but it's also probably a very polarizing read, because I know a lot of people need that information. They need the world building. They need the reason why. And to some degree, I am that person. But once I really just let myself go, I loved this book. It was probably one of the most original books I've read this year, if not in the past few years. While it is a romance, it's also so much more than that, and it's really clever. And again, I found myself actually understanding the plot, so that was nice. Definitely a recommend for me from this quarter. And then we have something a bit different. So the next book I'm going to speak about is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I listened to this book on audio. I was feeling something a little bit light-hearted and twee, and so I picked this book. So this is another novel kind of about found family. It's a trope that always gets me. I just love it for some reason. So we follow Micah Moon, and she is a witch, but she's living in the UK, and witches are not something that are existing out in the open, and it's a very lonely, solitary lifestyle that witches live, because they are not allowed to kind of commune together too often in case their powers kind of mingle and draw attention. So Micah grew up as an orphan and was raised pretty much by strangers, so she knows what it's like to live a solitary life. She pretty much follows the rules, except for she does have an online social media channel where she posts videos of herself pretending to be a witch, thinking that nobody will really kind of catch on Like, why would they? But then she receives a mysterious letter which begs her to come to Nowhere House to teach 3 young witches how to control their magic. Even though this breaks pretty much all of the rules, she decides to take them up on this job. She travels to the mysterious Nowhere House, where she meets her 3 charges and also the rest of the staff that are working in this house. What follows is just a lovely novel of silly, lovely interactions. I really adored it. I adored the romance, and as somebody who's not really a romance reader, it was just this side of tolerable for me. But where I thought this novel really shone was the whole found family trope. It's really sweet, it's silly, it's wholesome, but also there's like a bit of swearing in there too, so it kind of balances things out. I didn't think I would love this book as much as I did, but I just really found it to be so cozy and just to be exactly what I needed. So then the next book that we have is another fantasy, not a fantasy romance, just a traditional fantasy book, and it is of course Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I adored this book. I feel like people have been telling me for such a long time that I will really like this book, but I just kept putting it off. So it's the first book in Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy, and we follow a little boy named Fitz. I love Fitz, and the story starts with kind of his first memory where he is dropped at the keep of a castle by his grandfather and his mother. Now, he doesn't really remember anything about his family before being dropped here, and the reason that he's dropped here is he's actually the illegitimate son of the crown prince, but we don't know why his family don't want him. We don't know if it's to give him a better life or if it's just too much for them. He's not really accepted as a legit member of the royal family, so he's raised kind of in the stables with the staff, and we see him develop these really lovely relationships with the animals, so with the horses and especially the dogs. And as the story moves on, we do learn that this affinity that he has with animals is potentially a little bit magical and definitely very much frowned upon, so he has to kind of hide it essentially, which is really sad because he has such lovely relationships with these animals, and I love animals, so this really sold me on this book as well. It really helped me get into it. So as he gets a little bit older, he is actually recruited by the king to be trained as a royal assassin, and he goes through this grueling training process where he's treated much worse than unkindly at times, but he always perseveres. Like, so many horrible things happen to this poor boy, and he just gets on with it and he tries his hardest. We see time and time again how he fights to kind of be seen as deserving of his place, and the place that he has is not by any means privileged. He has it hard, friends. He has it hard. There is quite a bit of politics in this book as well, and when Fitz is sent out on his first real proper royal mission, we see a lot of these political schemes kind of clashing, and it puts Fitz into a bit of a situation, and I loved it, and I cannot wait to read the next book in the trilogy to catch up with Fitz again. I have heard this book being called incredibly slow, so as a fantasy book it is not really plotted in the traditional way that they might usually be. It's quite slow, and I would say it's more character driven than plot driven, which is unusual for a fantasy. So if you're looking for something fast paced with dragons and a lot of the usual tropes, I would say this is not this book. But this book absolutely deserves its place in this list. And then last but not least, we have on this list a book by Rebecca Ross called Divine Rivals. So this is one of these ones that you have surely heard of at some point. We follow Iris, who is working as an intern at a newspaper called the Oath Gazette. And Iris is struggling a bit. Her mom is living with addiction, and her brother, whom she absolutely adores, has gone off to fight in the war a few months prior, and she hasn't heard anything from him since, doesn't know where he is, doesn't know what's going on with him, and she's incredibly worried about him. She feels like her best bet at getting ahead is to earn the columnist promotion at the Gazette, but she's up against another intern named Roman, and Roman is of course cold, brooding and handsome, and Iris really feels herself struggling in terms of finding ways to best him so that she can win this position in the workplace. So as a writer, Iris has been left a typewriter by her grandmother, and Iris uses this typewriter at home to write letters to her brother, but she doesn't know where to send them, she doesn't know what to do with them. So for some reason she starts to pop them under the door of the closet in her bedroom, and she wakes up one morning after sending the first one and realizes she's gotten a response. She knows kind of that these letters aren't from her brother, but she doesn't know where they're coming from. She's intrigued to find out who it is and finds herself falling for the words of this kind stranger. At a later stage then, we see Iris move closer to the front lines of the war as a war journalist. She does this because she really wants to find out more about her brother. We learn then that this war is actually a war between gods, which I found really interesting because a lot of the book feels very coded, as though it's kind of a historical novel set maybe during kind of World War II. I may have misled you. We always know that this is a war between gods, but we really see the implications of that once Iris kind of moves toward the front lines. So this is another book that's about found family. Again, as I've mentioned, it's a trope I always seem to fall for. So I really enjoyed the plotting, the pacing, and the characters. And there is, of course, a romance here as well. And again, I found this romance tolerable. I thought it was nice. So I'm sorry, I am not hating on romance readers. I just don't really enjoy a lot of them myself, unfortunately. I'm really looking forward to the sequel of this being released at the end of this year, I believe the day after Christmas. I just really want to know what happens next because the ending of this book is really interesting. And often I forget like major plot points in books, but it's a really good sign because I do remember how this book ended, and I really want to know what happens to these characters, what happens with this war. I really want to know more about this war. I would say it's probably a young adult book. It's not the most intricately plotted book. You wouldn't believe how many times I just tried to say that sentence and had to cut it out. But it is really quite interesting. I loved the concept of it, and I would definitely recommend it as something to read if you're looking for something that's a little bit of an easier read, not necessarily a lighter read, but it's lighter than maybe a lot of fantasy. It's definitely a quick read, so it's very much deserving of this place in this list, I personally believe anyway. And there you have it. Those are the 6 books that really stand out for me in the quarter from July, August and September. Let me know if you read any of these books, or indeed if you have any recommendations kind of based on these books, because I really enjoyed each of them for what they were. I think I'm starting to find myself a little bit more interested in sci-fi lately as well, so if you feel like there are any more kind of serious sci-fi books that might be a great gateway for me, please do let me know in the comments below. I hope you're all keeping well and you're really minding yourselves as ever. If you feel like you'd like to see some more of my videos, please don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, but as ever, absolutely no pressure. Let me know what you've been reading. What were your best books between the 3 months I've just mentioned? Have you read any 5-star books yourself? Let me know. So of course, that's that for me, and I will see you soon for another video next Sunday. Mind yourselves, I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye bye.